Our second New Testament reading this morning is from the final book of the Bible, its final chapter, Revelation 22. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, through the middle of the street of the city. And on either side of the river is the tree of life, with its 12 kinds of fruit, producing its fruit each month. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. Step, step, breathe. Step, step, breathe. And my climbing partner Dan and I neared the summit of Pinta Peak in Glacier National Park. We paused to catch our breath in the thin air and to take in the stunning beauty of the mountains. Under our feet, bright red and green mudstones were laced with ripple marks and raindrop splatters from waters that covered these lands over 1 billion years before we came to them. An earlier surface of the earth now raised 10,000 feet above the sea. Fragile but hardy alpine flowers, purple phacelia, yellow glacier lilies, blue lupin, clung to rock and ice. And in every direction, water. Wispy clouds of vapor above us, glaciers, waters, waterfalls, streams, and lakes below us, gathered from winter storms on the peaks and now making their way down to water the earth. 6,000 feet below, wind rippled across Kindle Lake, like the breath of God that swept over the face of the waters of creation. And all around us blew a gentle breeze, reminding us of God's breathed word separating the earth from the waters, preparing the new world for the birds of the air and the fishes of the sea and the beasts of the land, an explosion of light that God saw and said, "This is good. This is very good." And at the end of those marvelous first days, with a spectacular world set to receive us, in stepped humans, into a world of beauty already filled and complete, into an earth story stretching back billions of years, lacking only a creature who could marvel at its beauty, its harmony, its completion, and wonder at its goodness, reflecting the God who made it, and breathe out that prayer, "It is good. It is very good." In the beginning, Jewish and Christian scriptures begin with a hymn that celebrates the beauty of the earth, the creation of God, and our place in that creation. Everything that follows in the biblical story is set in the context of the goodness of creation and our place as its caretakers. God creates humans in the divine image, and we reflect this image most deeply when we see the earth as God does, marveling at its amazing diversity of life and stone, and when we act as God does toward creation, through deeds of care, compassion, and justice. And water. Central to God's story of creation and redemption are God's living waters. It's not a coincidence that the Bible begins and ends with water. In Genesis, the earth and the waters literally bring forth myriad forms of life. Before humans even appear, God's first blessing is to all the earth, sky, and sea creatures, which he commands to be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the sea, and let birds multiply on the earth. And at the end of the Bible, at the end of the book of Revelation, after a scripture full of human rebellion, sin, and injustice, God turns again to the waters of life, this time for healing and justice. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb. On either side of the river is the tree of life, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. In between Genesis and Revelation, water time and again is the site of saving encounters with God. Think of God parting the waters for Moses to liberate the Hebrew slaves. Or the stories of Jesus at the Sea of Galilee, filling the disciples' nets and feeding the hungry. Water, both literally and symbolically, is the source of life and salvation throughout the Bible. Nancy Wright, a dear friend, mentor, and long ago my seminary internship supervisor, I survived the internship, she supervised it, spent a recent sabbatical on a pilgrimage to several places of sacred waters, from the Celtic island of Iona to the river Jordan in Palestine, to look at the place of waters in the Bible, in our world, and in our faith. And in a moving testimonial titled Living Water, she reflects on 3 blessings she received. First, the blessing of water itself, and a renewed awareness of water as the matrix of all life. Second, a deeper Christian reflection on living water as a part of the ritual of baptism that binds us to our faith. And third, a conviction for our culture today to have a deeper union, a deeper reunion with water that is rooted in recognizing its sacred and sacramental nature. Like many of us today, Nancy is deeply concerned about the state of the water in our world. That while 71% of the Earth's surface is water, only 1% of that is fresh water, existing in rivers and lakes and aquifers, increasingly being depleted. That all organisms, including humans, consist chiefly of water, but increasingly all organisms carry within them toxic chemicals from human industry that now contaminate virtually all the waters of the earth. That ocean ecosystems worldwide are collapsing. Yet water itself is the matrix of all life and the origin of God's creation and blessing of life. Reflecting on the role of water in baptism, Nancy notes that for the first several centuries,
okay, there we go. Can you hear me okay?
Prior to baptism,
it's past 4 o'clock, which means that we're up for a Brahms Street.
The
Right.
4th century, the physical condition of water, pure and flowing, that is, living, was itself the blessing that we receive.
I'm so glad that you're here.
The 4th
This is my
century
final
Christian,
doctoral
Cyril of
project that
Jerusalem,
I'm doing for my
reflected
doctoral
this in
degree
his
at sea.
meditation on the place of
And,
water in baptism.
I'm really excited about
And why has Christ
what I have
called the
to
grace of the
present.
Spirit by the name of water?
Splendid pieces.
Because by
One,
water,
a contrapuntal
all
work,
things subsist.
strophe after strophe,
For one
worked out
fountain
feebly.
watered the whole of the garden,
Soon the chorale enters,
and one and the
and
same
from the
rain
developing
comes down
chorale,
on all
a
the
theme
world.
in the upper fifth
Yet
follows.
this rain becomes
With
white
all
in
its
the lily,
precision, this work
red
is
in the
splendid
rose,
music, true
purple
Brahms.
in the violet and pansies,
These comments were made by a
different
former
various
student
in
of
every
Brahms,
season.
Richard Hoyberg,
adapting itself
upon
to nature
studying the
each
finished
thing which
chorale
receives it.
preludes on June
It
24,
becomes to each what is
1896,
suited.
while visiting Brahms at his
The miracle
Austrian
of
summer
water
residence
is that
in
each
Mission.
form of life adapts it to meet its
In the
needs
spring
first.
of 1896, during
And
the last
tragedy
year
is
of
that
his life,
increasingly
Johannes
there is not
Brahms
enough water
composed
to meet
11
all these
chorale
needs,
preludes.
where the water is contained.
The last of these preludes,
Whether for
O
poor
Welt,
humans
ich muss dich
or for
lassen,
more than human
was
kind.
also the final piece of music that he wrote.
Many of these dynamics are reflected in the
Brahms' choice
biblical
to write
stories
for
of
the
Hagar
organ,
in the
an
Old
instrument
Testament,
for which he
and
had
the
not
Samaritan
composed
woman
music
at
in
Jacob's
over
well.
32
And
years,
they share a common
surprised
thread.
his audience.
In each case,
These
a
chorale
woman who is
preludes
marginalized
differed
in
from
dominant
all his other
society by
compositions
her gender
in that they were
and
all
her
based on
ethnicity.
sacred chorales.
In counting deliberate
As a
encounters,
collection, they
the living
offer
waters
several
of God
topics
well.
for discussion.
and finds her life
References to mortality appear through all 11 preludes, from direct requests for death and references to God's heavenly kingdom, to celebratory verses about the newborn Christ. Scholars agree that Brahms had a conflicting relationship with religion in general and Christianity in particular. Growing up Lutheran, he was well read and educated in the biblical stories, and still he distanced himself from the communities of faith by identifying as a non-Christian. Brahms is often seen as both a traditionalist and a progressive. He mastered traditional elements such as form and counterpoint, and maintained a conservative approach to harmonic language. However, he also challenged the contemporary ideals through his innovative rhythmic patterns and bold metrical shifts. His 11 chorale preludes reveal his traditional instincts with highly contrapuntal elements and symbolic motives, with melodic, rhythmic, and numeric aspects. Although the form and structure may be traditional, the harmonic language and intimate treatment of each chorale testifies to Brahms' musical ingenuity. The intimate and personal treatment of each chorale prelude raises a few questions. Why did Brahms choose to write for the organ more than 30 years after his last organ composition? What were his reasons for composing music based on sacred chorales? Given his atheism, how did he relate to the religious chorale texts? What composers and compositional techniques played influential roles in the creative process? In this paper, I will discuss the 11 chorale preludes from the point of text-music relationships, musical symbolism, and structure. Through examples, I will discuss factors of influence and symbolism in Brahms' chorale preludes. In my main resources have included books and scholarly articles, along with 2 editions of the chorale preludes. Following the death of several of his friends, Johannes Brahms experienced an existential crisis, one that even shaped his composing. After a brief pause from writing music in 1890, he composed several pieces for clarinet, as well as a piano cycle. Although the character of these pieces belongs to Brahms' autumnal, more intimate works, it is his last 2 opuses that reflect on mortality and other existential questions. In 1896, Brahms lost his lifelong friend Clara Schumann, who died in May, several months after suffering a stroke. During this time of grief, he completed Vier Angstige Sänger, a song cycle using biblical texts pertaining to death. At the same time, he was working on the chorale preludes, which have a similar theme of mortality. So, based on Brahms' own dating of the preludes, we know that the first 7 were composed in May of 1896, and the remaining 4 in the following month. It is unclear whether Brahms intended one set of 11 preludes or 2 sets of 7. Musicologist and author Barbara Owen advocates for the second option, basing her theory on the fact that Brahms sometimes composed and published compositions in pairs, or based on the number 7 or multiples. From the original manuscripts of the preludes, we see that they were composed in a different order than published, and that the style of handwriting differs between the 7 first preludes and the last 4. Owen suggests that Brahms might have composed some of the preludes as early as 1882, and bases her argument on records of Brahms writing to his publishing editor, Eusebius Mandysevsky. Mandysevsky writes in his preface to the 1927 edition by Breitkopf and Hertel of Brahms' complete works that, quote, "It can be assumed that Brahms intended to publish 2 or perhaps several volumes of 7 pieces each.
Most of us here need get water
The
very
arguments
hot
for 2
on
sets
the
of
dry
7
ice
preludes are
Extra
supported
non-processed,
also by other
but not
musicologists
constrained,
as well.
reliable water.
But one researcher,
There's
George
separate
Bozard,
rights.
opens
The
up for a
biggest
third
distinction in
possibility,
today's world might
that
very
Brahms
well be
intended the
between
last
those
4
people who
preludes
know
to be
what
independent.
toil is to gather water each
He does
day.
not present any further evidence for this viewpoint, other than the already
This is
known fact
especially the
that
case
the
in much of the
preludes are
two-thirds
dated
world,
differently.
where an estimated 1.2 billion people
Researchers
have
and
access to
musicologists
clean water
debate the
and
reasons
sanitation.
why Brahms chose to compose
And
music
so Pepper
based
continues
on
and
chorales,
says,
a
water from
clearly
the
sacred
Samaritan
genre.
woman-
Some
water
argue
was from the
that
Samaritan
Brahms
woman,
was inspired
but
by
lives for
J.S.
women
Bach
throughout the
when
world
editing
today.
his music.
Life defines
Others
work.
claim that he chose chorale
daily
preludes
toil.
because he was fond of folk
Women
songs.
across time and space find
A
themselves
third
walking
group
into
believed that
each
he was a
day,
dying man
longing for
trying to
shade,
reconcile with
bearing
God.
several kinds of burden.
And
As
personally,
a result of
I'm
fresh
drawn
water
to a
sources.
combination of the first and third arguments,
Pepper lifts up
as
3
form and
specific
motives
burdens
are
that women
frequently
often
similar to the preludes of J.S. Bach.
First, she writes,
And I also find it
literally
difficult to
burdensome.
argue that Brahms
Since
wrote
water
his
is bulky
preludes
and heavy,
without
it
intending
shapes
a
the
deep
musculature
meaning.
and the
His
skeletal
choice of writing
function
music
of the
based
women
on the
and
sacred
girls
chorales,
who walk miles
along
each
with the
day
individual
to procure
treatment
it.
of them all, is far too emotionally
Second,
involved.
fresh water scarcity
Faith
is
is often a
burden
personal
because it
matter,
limits economic
and few would put
educational
anything in
opportunities
writing
for girls
about
and
their
women
personal
around the
beliefs
world.
that they could not
Many
support.
girls in the developing world
Brahms'
are
choice to
deprived of
return to the
education
sacred genre of
because their
chorale
energies must be
preludes
devoted
must have
to
come from a
procuring
sincere
water for
desire
domestic
to
use.
explore the existential
And
matters of
third,
life after
there's the
death.
burden of sex.
Aside from the
Worldwide,
preludes,
women
Brahms
find
wrote
themselves
other
at
music
those
based
midday
on sacred
because they have
content.
been born income
In the
in
same year,
societies that,
1896,
in the absence
he
of
composed the
infrastructure,
already mentioned
turn to
Vier
women's
Einstige Gesänge,
water-gathering energies.
and about 30 years
This is
earlier,
systemic,
in
social
1868,
disenfranchisement
he finished
in which
his
the work
Ein
of one
Deutsches
sex
Requiem.
is linked to the work of water.
Brahms' choice of biblical texts
Yet
for his
Jesus is
Requiem
living
does
water
not
in
follow
this
any
context
liturgy
too.
or
For
lectionary,
as he did
but is
throughout
rather a
history,
collection
he
of his
calls
own
us
texts
to
or
resist and
choices.
transform social structures
In
and
many of the
practices
movements,
that
he
enslave
mixes
and oppress
quotations
others,
from the Old
in this
and the
case
New
women.
Testament, and
So
ties the
water
entire
becomes
Requiem
living
together
water
with 3
only when it's
Beatitudes.
also just water.
Author Paul
When
Minier
all
writes
have access to
the
what they
following
need to
about the
live
Requiem.
and flourish.
Thus, the final movement of the German
There is perhaps
Requiem is a
no
musical
starker
confession
reminder
of
of
faith
this for us
that
in the United
encompasses
States,
all the
than
earlier
what happens
motives
in the
of
deserts of our
confidence
border
and
regions
comfort.
just south of
Neither
us.
here or in any earlier movement does the composer allow philosophical debate or theological dogma about death to intrude upon the consciousness of the audience. His music is a poetry of joy that celebrates the loss of death's sting by drawing the audience into a nonverbal experience of comfort, confidence, and hope.
Humanitarian relief workers flout the law to store caches of water jugs in hopes that
So,
like Hagar,
in a similar way,
migrants' eyes will be opened
Brahms chose
and they will live.
chorales that would serve his own
Many do not.
interest. He did not follow
And as Pepper
lectionary
notes,
or the
burden to
liturgical year
multiply
like
for
J.S.
female
Bach did
audience.
with his Orgelbüchlein.
Many suffer
In that
atrocious
sense, the
abuse
chorale
at the hands
preludes
of their
serve as
smugglers.
a witness
They
to
are
Brahms'
robbed,
own faith.
sexually assaulted.
And now we are going to look closer into the preludes
So as
themselves.
Pepper concludes,
And
whether
due
it's
to our
helping
limited
water
time here,
families
I have
or
omitted a
seeking
few of the
water in
preludes
exile,
in order to allow
the
us to
burden
look
of
more
water
to the
is
ones that I
genuine.
find the most interesting.
The story of the
And we're
Samaritan
starting,
woman at the well reminds us of this.
With
And
prelude number
it
1,
raises the question
not
of what it
surprising.
will take for water
Mein
to
Jesu,
become
der du
just
mich,
water
because of its traditional form and
for those
structure.
for these women.
But before we begin, I want to explain the term cantus
So let me
firmus to
conclude by
you,
reflecting briefly on
which is
two
one that I will use a
water-related
lot
issues
when
facing
talking
Colorado.
about the preludes.
In our workshop here
And
yesterday,
cantus firmus is
by the
simply
way, I
another
just have to say,
word
this
for the main
congregation is
melody.
so fortunate
In this
to
case,
have
the
the members
chorale
of the
melody.
Eagle Ministry who just
And it
so
can
very
appear
good.
in
It
any
just
voice,
really
often,
wonderful,
but
wonderful
not
things on behalf of our work.
necessarily in
Raise my hand in
augmented
applause.
note
It's really
values.
wonderful people that I got to
And
spend the morning with yesterday.
The example you see here is from J.S. Bach's chorale prelude for Deinen Thron, where you can easily see the cantus firmus, or the chorale melody, in the soprano voice. But this is just an example of cantus firmus. I'm not going to discuss this example. Prelude number 1, Mein Jesu, der du mich, is the second longest of the chorale preludes and is composed according to Pachelbel's style, meaning that each cantus firmus entry is preceded by one or several ornamented versions of that same cantus firmus phrase. And I'm just really quickly going to sing the cantus firmus melody for you, and then you'll see it marked with the purple arrows. That's the melody that this first line is built on, and here ornamented. So, additionally, Brahms adds a second level of complexity by structuring the ornamented phrases into a fugal style, with each new phrase entering a fifth higher or lower in relation to the initial line. And I have marked the first of these fugal entries with a pink arrow. A brief rhythmic countermotive consists of a dotted eighth note pattern, and that is here indicated by the blue arrow. When cantus firmus enters in the pedal a few measures later, Brahms has created a structure closely resembling a counterpoint exercise. Despite his own harmonic language with inventive modulations and chromatic lines, Brahms' admirations for the contrapuntal music of Johann Sebastian is obvious. This combination of old structure and form with the harmonies and melodic lines of Brahms results in an intriguing marriage of old ideas with contemporary sounds. And the prelude continues following the same structure of embellished phrases based on each following cantus firmus line. Other examples of chorale preludes with a similar structure to Mein Jesu, der du mich include J.S. Bach's Komm, Heiliger Geist, Wallet will ich dir geben, and Max Reger's Ein Festival ist unser Gott. Prelude, chorale prelude number 2, Herz liebster Jesu, is based on a passion chorale with the cantus firmus assigned to the soprano voice. Stylistically, the prelude is in the form of an embellished chorale. There are a number of recurring features in the accompaniment, of which several can be seen in this first example. The first is a group of 3 eighth notes, in the example marked with the purple arrows, either stepwise ascending or descending. And they appear frequently in the accompaniment, but also in the embellished cantus firmus line, and serves as a unifying factor throughout. Brahms' choice of using 3 stepwise ascending or descending notes may be for aesthetic reasons, as the figures enhance a general flow and sense of direction. But one could also easily apply a deeper meaning by seeing each of these figures as a symbol for the Trinity, and thereby as a constant reminder of the Christian God's presence in human affairs. The next component of interest is the high number of augmented fourths or diminished fifth intervals that occur throughout the prelude. This can be seen in the pedal in this example, where the first one, they're marked with a pink arrow, the first one going from F to B natural, and the second one from G to C sharp. The history of the augmented fourth or diminished fifth interval and its association with the devil and sin of humanity is one that cannot be ignored. The chorale text is overwhelmed with the author's guilt for the communal sin of crucifying Jesus, and these intervals strongly illustrate the pain and sorrow expressed in the text. Through these falling and rising intervals in the pedal, Brahms pays homage to J.S. Bach in his Durch Adams Fall ist ganz verdammt, where we can see the exact same patterns in the pedal of falling intervals, although they're larger, I believe, 7 and 16. And we're going to take a look at that prelude in just a moment. Brahms channels the text further by frequently using cross-pattern structures. And you can see that in the pedal as well, where I've drawn lines between some of the notes. A cross is created by drawing a line through the points of these chosen notes. And this is a technique that's also frequently used by J.S. Bach as a way of illustrating Jesus' pain and suffering. Here is an excerpt from Bach's chorale Durch Adams Fall. And you can see the exact same patterns in the pedal. First the falling sevenths, and then how these patterns also create, or these points create a cross pattern. Lastly, a high number of chromatic elements in this prelude provides yet another way to emphasize the author's struggle and guilt. And this example shows the descending chromatic pedal line of measures 11 through 13, which also illustrates Jesus' journey towards death. And note that the whole pedal line begins with yet another diminished fifth, although it's ascending this time. Prelude number 3, O Welt, ich muss dich lassen, alternates meter between 4/2 and 3/2, not less than 10 times during the 19-measure long piece, or should I say short piece. Even though Brahms changes meter to stay true to the chorale melody and the metric flow of the text, it causes a sense of instability and stands in sharp contrast to the calm, trusting words of the chorale. It is as if Brahms tries to calm himself or the listener with the reassuring words, but simply cannot trust them completely himself. In her thesis from 1994, Insuk Park describes the changing meter in combination with syncopations and chromatic material as a possible reflection of conflict and resistance occurring to a person confronting his or her own death. Oh, there we go. The main motive that repeats throughout the prelude consists of descending 8 notes, slurred in pairs, which you can see marked by the arrows on this example behind me. Each pair begins the descending pattern on the note where the previous pair ended. This descending motive was also used by J.S. Bach in some of his chorale preludes in the Orgelbüchlein. It has been called a sigh motive because it mimics the sound or shape of sighing. Parks describes a pulse-like or heartbeat feeling, which could be interpreted as yearning for a reunion with God. The slurs cause the performer to emphasize the first note of the pair and to release the second note upward, resulting in a shorter note value. There are also close similarities between the sigh motive theme of O Welt and the opening section of the final movement of Ein Deutsches Requiem. Most obviously, the rising and falling 8-note motive with slower note values in the melody. The earlier mentioned Barbara Owen suggests that both pieces might have been composed in the same time period, and she further argues that one could apply the tempi suggestions for the final movement of the Requiem also on the chorale prelude because of the motivic similarities. The sigh motive appears in both hands throughout the prelude, in both ascending and descending directions. Below all running 8 notes, Brahms has placed half notes in the pedal, giving the anxious phrases a stable anchor. The musical image becomes a great illustration of the angst and conflicting feelings of a dying person, along with the assuring steadiness of God in shape of the half notes in the pedal. As the prelude progresses, the harmonic rhythm changes more frequently. It follows the text and its fluctuations in intensity. When the chorale text talks about leaving this world, the music illustrates this through a slow harmonic progression, whereas the more literal description of leaving one's soul and life in God's hands is given a much more chromatic and dissonant harmonization. Besides the temporary sharps and chromatic lines, Brahms includes another motivic pattern by using the notes both below and above before reaching a desired pitch. This surrounding dissonance pattern, indicated by arrows in the example behind me, may be taken from the beginning of the second cantus firmus phrase and could serve as an illustration of humanity's struggle to find the right path in life. Author Joseph Horning describes O Welt as an embellished chorale. I would like to extend the description to a motivically embellished chorale, even if the cantus firmus entry is not preceded by motivic material based on material that is to come. The accompaniment binds each cantus firmus phrase together through frequently occurring motivic fragments. Brahms creates different impressions and moods for each phrase, a technique that is strongly connected to chorale preludes and variations of the earlier Baroque. At that time, the ideal was to let the text inspire the music. Thus, each phrase and section would communicate a certain mood or affect. Simultaneously, Brahms pays homage to J.S. Bach once again by using another composition technique to bring out the cantus firmus line. Instead of using the plain melody, Brahms embellishes each line by rhythmic and metric alterations along with the decorations of the melody. After an intense harmonic accompaniment of the cantus firmus, the last phrase eventually lands on a pedal point, all while the rhythm slows down through longer note values. At last, a last chromatic ascending scale in the left hand reinforces the impression of approaching the end, and finally, all parts reach the long-anticipated final chord. And now we're going to skip number 4 and jump directly to number 5. Schmücke dich, O liebe Seele, presents a steady, slow-moving melody in the soprano with a highly ornamented accompaniment of 16 notes. By ornamenting the accompaniment so intensely, Brahms successfully illustrates both the identity and first line of the chorale. He bases the main motivic accompaniment pattern on the first phrase of the chorale. And I think many of you recognize it. Schmücke dich, o liebe Seele. If you check each of the pink arrows, you'll see that that specific line has that exact same contour, which is, to me, very impressive. Let's see, here we go. Another pattern that is used often in this prelude, aside from the main accompaniment theme, is a 4/16 note figure, followed by 2 descending 8 notes. With a cantus firmus that contains a large amount of stepwise motion interspersed with a few jumps of a third, it is not difficult to create a connection with this rhythmic motive. On the other hand, this specific pattern, which I don't have an example of in this presentation, is used by J.S. Bach in his chorale, Wallet will ich dir geben, and there it becomes a symbol for pomp, celebration, and festivities. To use the same rhythmic figure in a chorale that talks about preparing oneself for the heavenly feast would be highly appropriate. Prelude number 6. O wie selig seid ihr doch, ihr Frommen. In this prelude, Brahms provides a large amount of musically interesting material in only 14 measures. The prelude is composed in compound 12/8 meter and is structured as a chorale fantasy. The cantus firmus is located in the soprano with 8-note triplets running in parallel formations. One may wonder if Brahms chose to write in compound meter because of the 3-phrase structured chorale text. Naturally, 3 is a universal Christian numeric symbol for the Trinity, and 4 represents the creation with its 4 corners and 4 seasons. Combined into 12/8 meter, Brahms includes creation and creator into one piece. 14, the total number of measures, is also one of Bach's favorite numbers, as that is the sum of his name, B-A-C-H, if adding the corresponding numbers assigned to each letter. There's no pedal part in this prelude until the very last measure and a half. O wie selig can be seen as a study in the use of chromatics while remaining in a set tonality. The accompaniment is structured mainly into 2 8-note patterns. The first, a 3-note descending line, followed by a stepwise returning figure, and the second pattern is based on the first cantus firmus phrase. My example behind me illustrates both of these patterns. First, in the beginning, we see the 3-note pattern, although inverted. And in the next measure, I've included an example of the cantus firmus influenced pattern in the tenor and alto voices, where they run parallel. The next example is a brief illustration of an intense harmonic progression that Brahms assigns to a hemiola on the very last word of the chorale, gefangen. And now we're moving to prelude number 8. There we go. Es ist ein Ros entsprungen is the only one of Brahms' 11 preludes with a hidden cantus firmus. As you can see, the melody moves between suspensions and chromatic passages. It rarely appears with a correct note value or on the expected beat, but occurs as a passing tone in a different melodic line. And this new material shifts octaves for each phrase, as does the accompaniment voices. In measure 14, the very last phrase of the chorale is repeated, which does not happen in any other prelude. It is also written an octave lower, hidden in between the other lines. Brahms works with small intervals in Es ist ein Ros. Rarely does the melodic line go beyond the interval of a third. He circles around the melody through suspensions both from above and below, making it very difficult to identify. Rather than proclaiming the birth of Jesus with a pompous trumpet fanfare and angel choir singing, Brahms chooses this quiet narrative. He invites only the people who have opened their ears and their hearts and are able to distinguish the melody to hear the good message. A rose does not develop overnight, but unfolds its petals slowly, one by one, until it reveals its entire beauty. Once again, we're making a jump, and we will go to prelude number 10. Prelude number 10, Herzlich tut mich verlangen, is based on the same chorale text as number 9, but seems almost like its direct opposite, with constantly running 16 notes above an ongoing line of pulsating 8 notes in the left hand. The cantus firmus consists of long notes in the pedal. And in the example behind me, you see the 8 notes in the left hand actually creating the cantus firmus. Do, 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 do. As a little teaser of what is to come. In measure 2, Brahms creates a rhythmic play by grouping the 16 notes in the right hand into groups of 3, in groups of 3 instead of 4. The 6/4 meter of Prelude 10 results in a rhythmic alternation of the cantus firmus voice. Instead of straight quarter notes, Brahms alternates quarter notes and half notes. In measure 3, the alto voice, earlier based on half notes and quarter notes, shifts to a running pattern of 16 notes. And throughout the entire first cantus firmus phrase, it runs in an inverted manner, whereas it later shifts to run parallel with the soprano voice. The word Freuden in measure 19 is cleverly illustrated by the rhythmic subdivision of 16 notes once again. In that same measure, the pacing prepares for the final adagio, which you see behind me. Brahms concludes the prelude with an A minor chord, not the Picardy third as in the prelude number 9. However, the original harmonization of the chorale ends on an E major chord, so Brahms does not stay true to the harmony in either of his 2 preludes. He does, however, leave a slight reference to the E major final chord by the use of D sharp twice in this last measure. And our last prelude, number 11, O Welt, ich muss dich lassen, is part of the second pair of preludes based on the same chorale melody. It is written in F major, just as its pair, number 3. The cantus firmus is located in the soprano, and each phrase is structured around echoes from forte. I don't know if it's possible to see in the first measure or the pickup measure, it's marked forte, to piano at the end of second measure, to pianissimo at the end of the third measure. And this also includes, of course, appropriate manual changes, not just register changes. In order to enhance the dynamic diminuendo of an echo, the last repeat appears an octave lower than the previous. Brahms successfully creates an illusion of someone steadily moving further and further away. And this double echo technique is unique in the genre of chorale preludes. As the prelude progresses, the echoes expand accordingly. At the beginning of the prelude, each repetition is 1 measure long, but by the end, they have extended to a little over 2 measures. Though the preludes may not have been published in the order they were intended, this chorale text is surely an appropriate choice for a final selection. Brahms successfully creates the image of someone resigned to death, and this chorale text is the most direct in terms of describing death and leaving this world. The last 3 measures consist of a last echo, but also of chords positioned to illustrate staggering, slowing breaths. There's no doubt that Brahms' 11 chorale preludes, opus 122, is a masterpiece, both as a collection and as individual pieces. As the last piece of music that he ever wrote, the preludes clearly belong to what has been called Brahms' autumnal works, and they testify to a dying man's existential contemplations and carry a common theme of mortality through each prelude. And this is shown directly in the chorale texts, but also through symbolic motives, melodic, numeric, and rhythmic, and through the harmonic language. And the influential elements from composers of the past, especially Johann Sebastian Bach and Johann Pachelbel, are frequent. And these influences are apparent in form, symbolic motives, and numeric references. Despite all symbolism, counterpoint, and motivic phrases, it is the chorales themselves that play the main role. Whatever reason Brahms had for choosing the chorale prelude as a format, the level of engagement required to compose music on such a high level testify to his strong personal connection to the music he wrote. Thank you. And I will not be playing all 11 preludes for you. We don't have time for that. I have chosen 5 pieces, number 2, 4,